I want to thank you, first off, for allowing me to come here and speak to you. This is a hot button issue. It is a matter of opinion. It's not something that we need to beat each other up over. It isn't something we need to get angry with each other over. It's a matter of opinion. And my opinion is very strong against it. And I fought hard for 8 years, and I'm going to say that I'm the driving force that's kept North Carolina from signing on to this thing for the 8 years that I was in the House. Let's start off. Let me read, just to refresh everybody here, okay, what Article 5 is. Okay, Convention of States, there's no such thing. It's not a Convention of States. That's a name they came up with, some group came up with, and that's fine. But if this thing comes to pass, it is a convention of the people. They work for us, they're there for us, they're not there for the states, and they're not there for the federal government. But here's Article 5, so just to refresh everybody, I'm sure everybody here has read it at some point. Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, they shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution, when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by Congress. And then it talks about no amendment can be made. There was one of the amendments in the initial Constitution, and you couldn't change it before the year 1820. That's what it says. Does it say anything about a convention of states? It doesn't say anything about some of the things that we've been hearing over the years, some of the attempts. There's been an attempt every 15 or 20 years since the inception of this union. There's been an attempt to hold another constitutional convention. Almost immediately after the convention of 1787, there were folks who wanted another convention. What is a constitutional convention? That's been an issue with the Convention of States folks. They say, oh, this is not a constitutional convention. They don't want you using that language that it's a constitutional convention. Because if you do, then those of us who have studied our history remember what happened at the last convention, Constitutional Convention. 1787, they were told, go in there and tweak the Articles of Confederation to make them suitable for the new union. What did they do? Did they tweak the Articles of Confederation? No, they didn't. They started from scratch, came up with a whole new form of government. Could that happen again? Question mark. What is a constitutional convention? It is a duly constituted assembly. This is according to Black's Law Dictionary, which is the authority on these types of things, on explanations, legal explanations. A duly constituted assembly of delegates or representatives of the people of a state or a nation for the purpose of framing, revising, or amending a constitution. That's a constitutional convention. The argument we get from the Convention of States folks is it's not a constitutional convention. They're only going in there to amend. Well, now you understand it is a constitutional convention. And all the connotations that come through your head thinking about what happened the first time can happen this time. I'm sorry, it's been a long week for me. My brain is slowing me down. Whether this thing passes or not is going to be up to you. You know what? I'm gonna, because I'm losing my train of thought. I've got a lot of papers here that got mixed up. I'm gonna let it go at that, and I will take your questions. Okay, I think that's probably a better way for this thing to roll.
In April 2017, Common Cause listed over 230 other George Soros-funded groups that oppose the COS resolution. Some of them are Planned Parenthood, NAACP, American Federation of Teachers, MoveOn.org, Southern Poverty Law Center, Your anti-COS viewpoint aligns with these and other fear-mongering leftist groups funded by George Soros. I happen to be a COS supporter. I support term limits, fiscal restraints, restrictive federal government
You have a
size
question?
and scope. And if you have a better plan, let me know.
A better plan for what? Your plan is not going to accomplish anything. And I love the comparison to the left. Oh, you're voting the same way the Democrats vote. I don't care who votes with me.
Why is it going to change anything? Why can't we change anything?
Okay, I'm gonna answer that. I don't get into the Democrats voted the same way you did. You know why the Democrats here voted the same way I did? Because I approached them and I said, you need to help kill this thing. You work with people on the things you can work with them on. This thing was started by the Democrats when they controlled 3/4 of the states, state legislatures. They no longer control 3/4 of the state legislatures. So they're not happy with it. Who is going to control those legislatures when this finally passes? When we finally get to the point where this thing is going to come to fruition? Who will control 3/4 of the state legislatures?
Right.
Nobody knows.
Right.
Things change very quickly. It could change in one election cycle. That's number one. Number two, I'm not going to allow you to change the issue, okay? And this is what COS does. They want to change the issue. Well, we need a balanced budget amendment. Well, we need this, we need that. Stop. The question is not whether we need this or whether we've got problems up there or not. The question is a constitutional convention the way to go to fix those problems? And the answer to that, in my opinion, is no. It is not. We can't get them to follow the Constitution. I asked Walter Jones one day when they were discussing the health care bill. I asked him. I said, "Why am I hearing the pros and cons of this bill, and I'm not hearing somebody stand up and say we don't have the constitutional power to pass this?" And he was honest with me, and he said, "Michael, look, I understand what you're saying." He said, "But we have gone so far past paying attention to the Constitution that they don't even look at it anymore." So how is a constitutional convention, how is changing that document that was put together by the smartest minds of that time going to make any difference? I closed my comments off to the folks, the legislators, by saying, I walked up to a couple of them. I said, "Look to your left, look to your right." They looked around, and I said, "Which of the people in this room would you walk up to and say, here, when you're at that convention, take care of my liberties?" I said, "Who in this room would you trust?" I said, "I love everybody in this room, but I wouldn't trust any of you with my liberty. I don't even trust myself having to make the decisions on that." The people that put together that Constitution were very learned people who understood different governments, who lived through tyranny, who lived through the fight for freedom.
Did you have a question back there?
I didn't mean,
Oh,
Mr. Speciale, I absolutely have the utmost respect for you, and I would have voted for you if Phil Shepherd wasn't. He's my pastor. I have to vote for him. But you know, anyway, and you know Phil, right? But anyway, I guess my question is: you have seen what happened. You saw what happened in November. We had the Democrats go out there, and they were harvesting votes. They were sending in absentee, I didn't want to call them absentee, they were mail-in ballots with no required signature, no legitimizing anything. And now we have a democratically controlled Congress in the House, in the U.S. and Senate, trying to push down our throats H.R. 1 and S.R. 1. Now, right now, it's still in S.R. 1. Once that happens and it goes to negotiations or whatever, what other than the Convention of States, and I so far am a Convention of States supporter, and I want you to change my mind. What can we do to stop those freaks from taking away my Constitution and making sure that every vote is absolute and is legitimate. Because right now, if HR1 and SR1 goes through, we'll never see another Republican president elected, because they're doing this in order to keep out Donald Trump's and others who can fight for the Constitution. Right now, I don't see any other avenue, because we can't sit there and ask our representatives to vote on it, because every vote we get, then the other side is going to get 10 more votes because they make them up. And that's what my concern is, because I want to make sure that it's protected. Right now, the Convention of States right now is the only legitimate way that I see it can happen.
Yes.
Let me start by answering your question by saying that the assumption, your question is based on the assumption that the Convention of States is a way to fix it. And my position is it is not. So it's like saying, I'm going to change my suit jacket, and that's going to fix all the problems. It makes no sense.
Why?
Okay?
What else
It's
can
not
we
the
do,
answer.
though?
It's
What
not.
is
I'm getting
the
ready. I'm
answer?
going to address that here in a second. But I just wanted to cover that. Okay, that we don't start on the assumption that the Convention of States is going to fix the problem, because I've already explained to you, you can't prohibit Congress in another amendment from doing something that they're already prohibited from doing. They're not paying attention to it now. There will just be more amendments for them not to pay attention to. Do not, please do not, as fellow Republicans, as fellow Americans, do not assume that all is lost and there's nothing being done. The states are working on legislation. They're passing legislation, and North Carolina is one of them, to tighten it up. Elections belong to the states. Okay? They belong to the states. Sometimes things happen. Sometimes you have to hit rock bottom. Sometimes you have to be on the losing end before you get up and you say, I've had enough. I believe that's where we're at, that we've had enough. Don't assume that elections don't work, or we've tried that before and look what happened. 1994, Americans got fed up with what was going on in Washington, and they replaced the lot of them. They replaced the party and put Republicans in charge. 12 years later, they got fed up with the Republicans doing the same thing, and they replaced them. So when people get fed up, when America gets fed up, we go to the polls and we do the jobs that we're supposed to do, and we vote these people out. We cannot, and this is my opinion, I know I'm in a Republican function, I'm a strong Republican, but we cannot just vote one way because we have the seat, we don't want to lose it. Use the primaries. When America gets angry, look what happened in Raleigh. What happened in Raleigh? People got fed up with Jim Black and the corruption. You know, there was a big joke there a few years back that if you wanted to speak to the leadership of the General Assembly, you had to take a trip to Raleigh Central Prison, because that's where they were all at. People, these rank and file North Carolinians got fed up, and they replaced the Democrats in a huge way in both chambers with Republicans. And Republicans have kept control since that time. No matter what's going on, and all the fighting and all of the things going on, Republicans have maintained control. It's not because of anything that we did while we were up there. It's because of what you did down here. So don't underestimate your abilities. Don't put, and I don't get on a soapbox here, but do not put politicians on a pedestal. None of us.
No, it's not a hand, well, actually, so I hand over here first.
Okay, so my question is, we see a lot of people in the legislature feel the positivity of the Convention of States for the advantage of term limits. What are your three biggest fears of what the opposite could happen as far as the unknown, your fears of the unknown
With term limits or with the convention?
if we were to have a convention?
Convention. Okay, well, let me start with term limits here real quick. What was the bill that was passed here? Term limits for Congress. I asked a few of our legislators, When will you be passing the one for Raleigh, for our Raleigh legislators?
Only Congress.
And I heard nothing. It's okay to pass one for Congress, but it's not okay to pass one for themselves here. If term limits are a good deal, then it should apply to everyone, number one. And your question was, what are my three?
fears that could happen should we have a convention of states?
My biggest fear is that stuff is going to come out of that convention that's not good for America. That because they didn't take the time, everything I've seen, it was 3 to 5 days for this convention. I can promise you, having dealt with this stuff, okay, there's no way in 3 to 5 days they're going to take these full circle, everything that they propose, full circle, and be able to make sure that it does what it was they wanted it to do. So that's the big fear. The other fear, of course, is that it could run away. And it doesn't have to be them creating a whole new government. One amendment, properly written, can destroy many of our freedoms. One amendment. And initially, the convention of states folks said, well, yeah, but the people are going to vote. Do you really think the people are going to vote on something like? And I said, the people voted for Obama twice. Don't tell me what the people vote for, number one. I said, number two, I read Article 5, and nowhere in there does it say that people get to vote on this. You don't. You don't get a say on it. It's either by a state convention or it's by the legislature. So do you really want your legislature making the decisions about your freedoms coming out of Washington? Again, who's going to be in charge at the time that this happens? Those are my biggest fears. That something's going to come out of there that they didn't take full circle, that they didn't look at it. I'm going to give you a quick example of not taking something full circle. And this didn't happen here. This was, I could find a couple of them here, but let's take Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara a few years ago passed an open I forget what it's called, open spaces ordinance. If it's an open space, it now has to stay an open space. You can't build on it. You can only rebuild if you tore something down, and you could rebuild on that spot. Does that sound like a good idea? They want to keep some open space, but it sounds like a good idea in theory, doesn't it? What's wrong with it?
We're running out of land to build on.
What happened? Well, it infringed on your property, but the people that wrote this didn't think about that, infringed on your property rights. But overnight, property values skyrocketed. And now you got people, police and teachers and everything else that live in Santa Barbara, and the same thing in San Francisco and some of these other cities. They live there and they work there, and they're the backbone of the city, but they can't afford to live in the city, and they've got to drive for 2 hours because they can't afford to live in the city anymore because housing prices are too high. That's a case, just a quick case of not taking it full circle, and anybody that would have done so would have been able to figure that out. Overnight, the prices of the existing property would double and triple.
I think, let's take like 2 or 3 more questions. Rob?
Go ahead.
Several years back, I lived in Trenton, New Jersey. There was a debate between Michael Ferris and Andrew Shafley. Everybody knows Andrew Shafley from the Eagle Forum, and his mother, Phyllis Shafley, was famous with the women's group. In that debate, Michael Ferris asked Andrew Shafley when would be a good time for a convention. When would it be appropriate to have the convention of states? And Andrew Shafley's reply was, when we no longer have elections. I'm going to tell you right now, November 4th was not an election. And when martial law rules the street, we just spent the whole last year in de facto martial law. So then again, when is a good time?
If you go on the assumption that we have to have one at some point, then I would try and pick a point in time. But we're not under that assumption. It's not the answer to the current problems we have right now, so it's a moot question. I mean, there's no reason to try and answer that. It does not solve the problems that we have right now, which are what? Balanced budget, term limits, okay? These are not reasons to open up our Constitution. These are not reasons to put ourselves in jeopardy.
We're not about balanced budget.
Overreach with the federal government. Let's vote them out. Please don't say that didn't work. We control our government. I spent 20 years in the Marine Corps to defend our rights, as probably several in this room have. And I got involved in government because it appeared to me that we were losing our rights in the halls of government without a shot ever being fired. But that's because people are not standing up and doing what they need to do. We have the power. We have the power to replace everybody if we choose to do so. And we need to look at everybody from the lowest soil and water commissioner all the way on up. If they are not the right person for the job, they don't belong there. We don't vote for people because they're our friend or our neighbor, and I've told people that. Don't vote for me because I'm your friend or your neighbor. Vote for me if you think I can do the job and I can stand up to the press. And this is what we need. We need people who can stand up and be counted, who can stand up to the pressures of the press. And if anybody here has been watching my campaign, I've had a field day with the press, just like Trump has. I've had all the major press in this, probably in this country, all the way to California, coming after me. I didn't care. You know why? Because the people in this area are who I was fighting for. And if we can't find people who are willing to do that, then you know what? We probably do need a convention. But we need to start putting the right people in first.
What we just said, elections aren't.
Most conservatives have a hard time explaining their positions when they're just talking to somebody from the other side. Why is that? Because they're talking about something different than we're talking about, okay? And that's what's happening here. I talked to the president of the North Carolina Hispanic Democrats, and we were talking about people that jump over the fence and come into the country illegally. He said, well, in the course of our discussion, he said, we need them here to do jobs. We need immigrants here to do jobs that Americans won't do. And I said, stop. I said, don't even try that on me. And he said, what? I said, changing the subject. I'm not talking about immigrants. I'm talking about illegal aliens who jump the fence. That's why we can't win an argument. That's why we can't debate our points, because we're not paying attention. And what's happening with this Convention of States is the same thing. They're saying we need a balanced budget amendment, we need this. Heck, I agree with them, we need some things. Okay, I don't agree with the term limits, because that's your responsibility and mine. And I don't want that taken away from me. If I want to keep a guy for 20 years, I should be able to. If I want to dump him right away, that's my prerogative.
Okay. So my question is, if this were to happen, this Convention of States, do you only deal with specific issues, or is it like a free-for-all, it's open, like are we opening Pandora's box where anybody can talk about any amendment they want to bring up, or how exactly does that work?
The bills that have been put in run the gamut. They say you can only talk about this, some of them, or you can only talk about that, or it can only be related to this type of a subject, like finance or whatever. But I read you Article 5. Article 5 doesn't prohibit it. It's a convention. We've all been to convention. Who sets the rules at the convention? The delegates.
Right.
Who sets the agenda? The delegates. Now granted, they may have a prepared one when they come in there, but you can throw that, scrap that, and rewrite it. That's what will happen at the convention.
Right.
Those delegates decide what is covered, what is not, what they can do, what they cannot. The states do not have the authority, nor does Congress. They do not have the authority to restrict them in what they do.
Okay.
So once they're in there, once Congress calls it, Congress will determine the where and the when and who goes. The states will appoint those people, however they're going to do it, and then it's up to the delegates, just like it was in 1786.
Fran, yeah. Did I say that right?
Fran, yes.
Okay.
My spouse and I are both disabled veterans. Our families also have a history of serving our country honorably. Mr. Speciale, you two are also a retired Marine and a former North Carolina State Representative. Our nation's flag is 50 stars, and that represents each state. However, in 2017, you and George Cleveland introduced House Bill 147 to promote North Carolina's secession from the Union by removing its prohibition from our state constitution.
Forgive me, we.
Let her talk.
Okay, you said one person.
Let her
Just a
talk.
moment, Robert's Rule of Order, forgive me, it talks about not making statements that are critical, especially of a guest speaker.
Yes.
I believe this is a question and answer session. If you'd like to ask a question now, please
Yes.
do. Otherwise, this is not supposed to be personal attack.
It's not personal,
No,
it's about his
I'm sorry,
work.
you're out of order. I'm sorry. We do recognize the speaker on the floor. You were recognized. If you'd like to ask a question, please do so.
So what's your question?
It's the person that puts the party
Is.
together.
Should I continue from there?
Yeah, go ahead.
You promoted secession and nullification, which has a history of culminating in a bloody civil war, but you refused to cooperate with a civil solution such as a convention of states. How can you defend that position?
I'm glad you asked me that.
Mike, you want me to pull it?
No.
Because it's such a joke.
I put in four amendments to the Constitution that year. One of them, there was a couple of them, it was to clean up our Constitution. So one of them was to give you, for the first time, to give North Carolinians the opportunity to decide if you wanted that secession portion in there. It had nothing to do with wanting secession or pushing secession, but you never got a chance to vote on it. It was forced on North Carolina during Reconstruction. So that's the reason that was in there. It had nothing to do with whether I support or oppose. It's got nothing to do with it. It's a cleanup of the Constitution. I had another one that to remove the portion, the Jim Crow portion that said that you have to read and write the Constitution in order to be able to vote. A lot of people don't understand. That was on the ballot about 15 years ago. I don't know if some of you have been around here. And it was voted down. They didn't want to remove it because they didn't understand, because they don't give you enough explanation. That's a Jim Crow thing. It was designed to prevent blacks from voting.
That's right.
So I wanted it out of there. And there was a couple other ones, and I can't offhand remember what they were.
47 here. It's all, they were all amendments to the North Carolina State Constitution.
Right, it's the state constitution, and again, it was to clean it up and finally give North Carolinians the choice to decide if they still wanted that in there or not. I could care less which way it turned out, but you needed the choice because you never had that opportunity.
Senator, first time question, Steve Reed.
Hi, Mr. Speciale. I have a question for you. You brought up about how brilliant our founding fathers were in the design of the Constitution, and that would include that Fifth Amendment. Now, surely they put it in for a reason.
Okay, I started off this conversation by saying this is a matter of opinion, and I gave you my position on it. I fought for my position while I was in the House, and I'm here explaining why I fought for that position. Okay, I believe in the Article 5. I believe it at some point may be the necessary cure. It is to correct defects in the Constitution. Why haven't we used it in almost 2.5 centuries? Why haven't we used it? And yet there's been a call every 10 or 15 years for a convention. We haven't used it because people are smart enough to understand the ramifications of opening up that Constitution. Is Mark Levin's opinion more important than yours? We can all think for ourselves. We can make our own decisions. If this, and I will close with this. If an Article 5 convention is the solution to the problem, then support it. But if it is not the solution to the problem, and you can see that it isn't, it is not going to solve the problem, do not support it and tell your senators not to support it.
Well, we promised that was going to be a lively discussion, didn't we? Thank you so much, Michael.